This Snazzy Tapier production is made possible by our patrons. If you'd like to join them, head over to patreon.com/snazzytapier to get early access to new episodes, access to the members-only Discord, and our exclusive monthly newsletter. Now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to A Game of One's Own, a podcast all about solo and duet role-playing games. I'm your host, Maddy. My pronouns are they, them, and today I'm concluding my playthrough of Why We Fight, a solo plus game by Stop, Drop and Roll, who have also kindly sponsored this episode. At time of release, Why We Fight is crowdfunding on BackerKit, so if you enjoyed today's episode, please go and check out the campaign and consider backing the game yourself. Before we begin, a quick reminder that there are content warnings in the show notes, as there are for every episode of the show. Last we left off, our crew members Pax, Jem, Daniel and Susan were on their way to shut down a broadcast station, but on their way they ran into some looters from the militia known as the White Fist. Despite sustaining some injuries, the crew managed to stop the looters and save the city market. In this episode, the crew will encounter one more situation on their way to the final mission. After they've dealt with this additional situation, they will carry out their main task of shutting down the broadcast station. Will they be successful in their mission? Will everyone make it out of this alive? Let's find out. Once everyone's wounds had been bandaged, and once the offers of food, clothing and trinkets from the grateful stallholders had been politely turned down, the crew set off for the outskirts of the city. Soon the apartment buildings, malls and office complexes gave way to bungalows, semi-detached houses and schools. Turning onto a local shopping street, Pax was surprised to see at least half a dozen dogs and several cats playing, sleeping and sniffing around the area. There were even a couple of rabbits on a lawn nearby. Pax glanced around in delight and confusion. She spotted a sign on the building across the street which read, Lavender Animal Rescue. The rescue must have adopted so many animals that they adopted to let them play on the street outside. Sure enough, a woman in overalls walked out of the building, carrying a tray of water balls and set it down on the pavement. Before long, a couple of dogs and a cat were drinking happily from the bowls. Pax felt a jolt of emotion as she remembered her old pet, Kiki, a grumpy but loving spaniel who had died when she was in her teens. Kiki had been her constant companion, and the loss had hit her hard. Despite her family encouraging her to adopt a new pet, she couldn't. She didn't want to go through that loss again. But now, seeing so many animals that had lost their homes, she began to entertain the possibility of letting another pet into her life. But not now. Right now, she had a job to do. As they continued down the street, Daniel spotted a group of people standing outside a rundown post office, with worried looks on their faces and an urgent edge to their voices. "Hey there," said Daniel. "Everything okay? Anything we can do to help?" The people looked alarmed. "We don't want any trouble," a middle-aged man replied. "Probably best if you just pass through." "Hang on," a younger woman interrupted. "These folks look like they can handle themselves. Maybe they can help." "We're fine on our own," said the man. "We can solve our own problems." Daniel raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "We don't want to stick our noses in where they don't belong. But we have some skilled people in our crew, and we might be able to lend an extra hand if something's bothering you." The man was about to continue, but the young woman stopped him again. "Do any of you know about, security?" Jem cautiously raised a hand. "I've come up with some gadgets to help with security issues in the past. What's the problem?" The woman, whose name was Angela, explained that some nearby raiders had been patrolling the area at night for the past couple of weeks, putting everyone on edge. It seemed like the raiders were planning something, but no one really knew how to stop them without putting people at risk. Jem's mind immediately began to whir with ideas. They pulled a scrap of paper out of their pack and began sketching, talking through their thoughts as they went. Before long, the middle-aged man was nodding along and taking note of Jem's plans with interest. He finally introduced himself as Bargav, one of the community leaders of the suburb. Once Jem was finished, other members of the group set off to find materials to build the new contraptions. As the afternoon wore on into evening, Pax reminded Jem that they had to get going. Bargav, however, wouldn't let them leave until they had accepted a gift for their trouble. He rummaged around in his belongings and pulled out a pistol, somewhat worn but perfectly serviceable. Jem tentatively accepted the gift and shook hands with Bargav, Angela and their friends before heading off into the descending twilight, the crew at their side. As the houses slowly receded into the distance, scrubland and motorways stretched before Jem's eyes. At last they could see a radio tower in the distance, their final destination. The crew had been monitoring guiding hand broadcasts in the area for a long time, and they finally felt ready to take down their regional base of operations once and for all. Propaganda, misinformation, and false promises were the only things the guiding hand were interested in sharing, and the most vulnerable people were also the most susceptible to these messages. Daniel knew that this was only one in a vast network of broadcast stations all across the continent, but he also knew that all change began with the smallest acts of resistance. He reached into his pocket and rubbed the lucky coin his best friend had given him with a thumb and forefinger. He didn't believe in luck, not really, but he believed in people, and that's what this coin really meant to him. The ability to change others' lives for the better, like his friend had done for him. "Thanks, Matt," he muttered, and let go of the coin. Approaching the broadcast station, the crew could see that it was surrounded by White Fist militia. The guiding hand operators had to be inside, handling the broadcast equipment. There was also an 18-wheeler parked outside, covered in dishes, an old oil tanker, and an improvised generator made from car engines. Pax spotted that the 18-wheeler was parked next to one of the less guarded entrances into the building. She asked Jem, "You think you can create a distraction?" Jem nodded, with a nervous smile. The crew sneaked over to the 18-wheeler. Jem picked the lock and crawled inside. They pried open one of the panels and started to mess around with the wires inside. Suddenly they whispered, "We have 30 seconds. Go, go!" The crew scurried away from the vehicle, positioning themselves behind the oil tanker. Sure enough, 30 seconds later, the vehicle's alarm began blaring, its lights flashing. The guards by the door were shocked and immediately dashed over to investigate the commotion. Susan led the crew towards the door, slipping in and out of the shadows without letting any of the distracted guards catch sight of them. Before any of the guards even thought about turning back to their post, Jem had picked the lock and the crew were safely inside the broadcast station. They crept along the bland, grey corridors until they reached the central control room. Daniel burst through the door, bow drawn, shouting, "Hands above your head! Surrender now, or things will get ugly!" 4 of the 5 operators inside the control room did as they were told, but one jabbed at a button with a shaking hand and an alarm began to echo through the station. "Shit," said Daniel, whipping around to face the control room door. Within seconds, 3 White Fist troopers burst in, one with a flamethrower, one with a grenade launcher, and one with a pistol. Jem drew their new pistol and fired at the grenadier, taking him down in one shot, but this left Jem open to a blast from the flamethrower, leaving the left side of their face badly burned. Pax's eyes darted to the operator who'd sounded the alarm. Their quivering finger was still hovering over the button that had summoned the troopers. Pax shoved the operator out of the way and pressed the button again. The alarm was silenced, but there were still 2 combatants and 5 operators to deal with. Susan tried to disarm one of the soldiers, but in the struggle a bullet from their pistol grazed her arm. She let go of the pistol and grabbed her arm with a grimace. Seeing Susan reel back, Daniel leapt forward with his hand axe and struck the trooper firmly in the temple with the handle. The trooper's eyes rolled back in their head as they slumped to the floor, unconscious. Susan gave Daniel an appreciative nod before launching at the guard with the flamethrower. She landed a resounding punch to his face and could feel his nose break under her fist. Even though the guard immediately crumpled, hands raised in surrender, she didn't stop. Blow after blow rained down until Daniel grabbed Susan by the shoulders and pulled her off. "Enough," he said, firmly, but with a tenderness that broke through Susan's rage. The guard lay unconscious alongside the dead grenadier. Daniel turned his attention to the operators, all of whom now had their hands raised above their heads. "Don't move a muscle," he said. The crew bound the operators' hands with rope and quickly ushered them out of the station. Daniel loaded them into the 18-wheeler, keeping an eye out for reinforcements. Jem hopped into the driver's seat and set the engine running. Once everyone was on board, Jem started driving. After a few minutes of tense silence, Jem finally let out a sigh of relief. They'd made it out alive. And they finally had a source of information about the Guiding Hand and White Fist's operations. 5 sources, to be exact. This was only the beginning, and they had to be ready for whatever came next. that's the end of my playthrough of Why We Fight. Thank you so much to Stop, Drop and Roll for creating such an incredible game and for making this 2-part story possible. If you want to support the game on BackerKit and try Why We Fight for yourself, or learn more about Stop, Drop and Roll's amazing work, there are links in the podcast description. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Game of One's Own. Our theme music, as always, is by James Barbarossa, and this week's episode also included music by Kevin MacLeod. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/snazzytapier for all the bonus goodies. You can follow the show on social media at A Game of One's Own, and find out more about my work at snazzytapier.com or at Maddy is Abstract on social media. See you next time for more weird stories.